Bienvenidos. This is a podcast that explores Latinx media and culture in its many forms. I am Dr. Rojo Robles.
And I am Dr. Rebecca L. Salois. And we are Latinx and Latin American Studies professors at Barrio College in New York City. In this podcast, we will analyze Latinx film, television, literature, art, and cultures.
We will consider how these works are perceived, analyze them, and investigate the real-world reflections and implication of that work on Latinx cultures in the U.S. and beyond.
Welcome to Latinx Visions.
Bienvenidos, bienvenidas, bienvenides.
Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back to this episode where we're talking about Latinx New York City and literature. This week, we are going to be discussing the novel Bodega Dreams by Ernesto Quiñonez, which was published in the year 2000.
As part of this analysis, I will propose 3 entryways into Bodega Dreams, a novel that goes deep into the idea of Nuyorican empowerment, highlighting the importance of personal determination, cultural pride, and political engagement in creating a just and equitable society.
I'm going to be discussing neoliberalism and its effect on the character of Willie Bodega in particular, and on the Barrio as a whole.
Finally, we'll wrap up our episode with a couple of recommendations, as always, for novels by Latinx authors that take place in New York City.
All right, so a little background on the author before we get started. Ernesto Quiñonez is a Latino author of Ecuadorian and Puerto Rican descent. He's an associate professor at Cornell University, but a product of public education from kindergarten at PS 72 all the way to the City College of New York, where he studied writing. He also taught bilingual 4th grade in the New York City public school system. He's published 3 novels. His first, Bodega Dreams, which we're covering today, was published, as we mentioned, in the year 2000. His second, Django's Fire, was published in 2004. And his most recent novel, Taina, came out in 2019.
All of them are based in New York City. So all of them could have been part of our
discussion,
our discussion.
But for time reasons, we decided to stick to one.
Yeah.
Now, according to the back cover of the novel, Bodega Dreams pulls us into Spanish Harlem, where the word is out, Willie Bodega is king. Need college tuition for your daughter? Startup funds for your fruit stand? Bodega can help. He gives everyone a leg up in exchange only for loyalty and a steady income from the drugs he pushes. This powerful debut novel brilliantly evokes the trial of Chino, a smart, promising young man to whom Bodega turns for a favor. Chino is drawn to Bodega's street-smart idealism, but soon finds himself in over his head, navigating an underworld of switchblade tempers, turncoat morality, and murder.
In terms of its connection to our season, Latinx New York City, Bodega Dreams vividly portrays East Harlem, New York City in the 1990s. The story follows the lives of Chino, as Rebecca was saying, a young Puerto Rican man who dreams of escaping the marginalization of his community. So through Chino's eyes, we see the struggles and complexity of life in Harlem, including poverty, violence, drugs, ethnic discrimination, and racism. One of the novel's main themes is the importance of community and cultural institutions and real estate ownership in fostering a sense of belonging and solidarity.
Yeah, and another critical theme in the novel is the tension between tradition and modernity, right? Family and street codes. Chino struggles to find value in his Puerto Rican heritage and the traditional religious values his wife Blanca was raised with the realities of street life in contemporary Harlem. Right? He also grapples with selling out and compromising the validation of those in his immediate community to achieve success in the city. Through its complex portrayal of Harlem, Bodega Dreams offers a nuanced perspective on the experiences of Puerto Ricans in New York City.
So starting with my section, I want to talk today about the Nuyorican legacy in Bodega Dreams. Yeah, so in the novel, the notion of Puerto Rican empowerment or Nuyorican empowerment is a central theme. As mentioned, the story takes place in East Harlem, also known as El Barrio, and it focuses on the life of a group of Puerto Rican characters navigating the increasingly neoliberal era of the 1990s, a period of disenchantment that saw the diminishing power of the activist wave and hope for societal change of the 1960s and 70s. In a way, Quiñonez's book reflects on the legacy of the community-led struggles, institutions, and poetics created in previous decades by the Nuyorican generation.
Now, we've talked about the term Nuyorican in the podcast before, but as a quick review and for new listeners, the term Nuyorican refers to the politics and artistic and cultural expressions of Puerto Rican immigrants and their descendants living in New York City. The term Nuyorican is a blend of New Yorker and Puerto Rican, and it's used to describe people, political ideas, and arts that emerged from the intersection of these two identities. Nuyorican culture encompasses a range of artistic expressions, including literature, music, visual arts, film, theater, and dance. It's also a political discourse concerning sovereignty in the archipelago and the diaspora.
Nuyorican artists often draw on their Puerto Rican heritage and the unique experiences of living in New York City to create works that blend Spanish and English, or what some people call Spanglish, and explore themes of colonialism, belonging and unbelonging, and of course social justice. Bodega Dreams look at the remnants of the original Nuyorican project of the 60s and 70s in Harlem, in El Barrio, primarily through the three different frames: the grassroots revolutionary activism of the Young Lords, the institutionalization of El Museo del Barrio, a Puerto Rican and Latinx art institution, and the literary works of the Nuyorican poets. I will now explore how the novel engages with these historical Boricua formations.
All right, let's do this.
The first theme or topic, or in this case, group that I want to talk about is the Young Lords. The Young Lords were a Puerto Rican social activist organization that emerged in the late 1960s in Chicago. Eventually, a New York group was founded inspired by the Chicago branch, the Black Power movement, and the global socialist revolution of the 1960s. For example, the Cuban Revolution. But not only that one.
It was the time and the place for all of this stuff.
The Chinese Revolution was also very big for the Young Lords. Their mission was to fight for the liberation, self-determination, and justice of Puerto Ricans and other oppressed communities. Within New York, they organized high-profile protests, such as the quote-unquote garbage riots that burned trash on the streets, or the occupation of a church in Harlem and a hospital in the Bronx. Through these actions, they advocated for social justice, particularly in sanitation, education, healthcare, the maintenance of buildings, and the reconceptualization of urban spaces into service-oriented sites. They aimed to challenge the status quo and create a more just and equitable society. We definitely recommend Baruch faculty Joanna Fernandez's book, The Young Lords: A Radical History, to dig deeper into the organization.
Absolutely.
Now, I want to bring a direct quote about the Young Lords from Quiñonez's novel. The Young Lords were beautiful. El Barrio was full of hope and revolution was in the air. We wanted jobs, real jobs. We wanted education, real education for our little brothers and sisters because it was too late for us. We wanted lead paint out of our buildings, window guards so our babies wouldn't go flying after pigeons. We wanted to be heard. But first, we knew we had to get the community on our side. End of quote. In Bodega Dreams, the Young Lords are central to the story. The quote I just read comes from Willie Bodega, the central figure in the narrative and a former member of the Young Lords. In an early scene, Bodega explains to Chino that after a couple of glorious years serving the community and transforming minds, the Lords faced internal divisions and changed their agenda. When the Young Lords got too high and mighty, they began to bicker among themselves. I was broken. I left and knew that the only way for me was to hustle. That's what Bodega says.
Yeah, it's tough when there is that internal struggle and you can't even have that united front within a group, right? That it's easy to become disillusioned, as it appears happened to Bodega.
So by the 1990s, he was still committed to the organization's program of creating a better life for the people in his community, for the people in El Barrio. But now he was a secret leader working with a lawyer and partner, Nazario, a very important character within the story. And he still mobilized the neighbors around issues such as gentrification and education and created a sense of solidarity and resistance. However, he shifted his tactics, embracing capitalism. Let's remember that the young lords were for socialism.
Right.
Yeah. And in a specific, he was embracing real estate, and drug trafficking as his socioeconomic tools for Puerto Rican empowerment. Rebecca will explore this in more detail.
I'll talk about that. I'll talk about that in a little bit, for sure.
I got another quote that it's related to that. This is Bodega talking, and he says, I got a line of buildings that are being renovated on 119th Street and Lexington. And Nazario is working with his contacts in City Hall on getting me more. Housing, Chino. That's how I'm going to do it. That's the vision. In summary, Bodega became a drug lord and a landlord. He used drug and blood money to buy buildings in East Harlem, employing and housing Puerto Rican community members. To maintain the sustainability of his neighborhood domains, he decided to keep an elite group of socios, a great society, that's how he calls it, who could help him create the legal facade of his business.
Right.
Chino was invited to join that great society.
Yeah, he wasn't so sure about it, but he was definitely invited, whether he liked it or not.
A lot of the novel is about, right, like that.
His
pushback, right? And about the debates that Chino has in his own mind regarding that possibility. To some extent, Bodega's vision kept the original Young Lord's agenda of occupying spaces for the use of the community. However, he did it through corrupted means, chanchullos legales en español. There's another element in Bodega's plan that differs, right? That is different significantly from what the Young Lords practice. The Young Lords considered drug use and addiction a social illness and created groundbreaking drug treatment programs, acupuncture-based rehabs, and mobile bilingual clinics. Bodega was pushing crack into the community to fund his underground real estate Harlem empire. Even with fundamental contradictions and his distortions concerning the Young Lord's mission, at the end of the novel, when Bodega is gone...
Spoiler alert.
The people in Harlem decided to pay homage to Willie and Carlos Irizarry, his real names, and his early activism, instead of focusing on his days as Bodega. Yeah. They care about the ways he empowered people daily by providing money and support in a compassionate way. They value how he intended to create safe spaces for the neighbors to live and come together.
His intentions were there. It's just his approach to actually making them happen was where the problems applied.
Yeah, we have like the great moral dilemma of the novel is precisely that. Yeah. But we have the people in Harlem, right, like celebrating, the things he did on a daily basis, and there's like some dialogues from the community, from community members in the novel that says, for example, he once helped me with the rent. He helped out my daughter through school. He helped me and my sister get jobs. He once bought me a case of Miller beer. So the people had taken to the script, but in honor, not anger, says and writes Ernesto Quiñonez. So now I want to move to the second, right, cultural formation that is presented in the novel, right, El Museo del Barrio.
Right. And fantastic museum. If you are in New York, definitely like give it a chance. But the role it plays in this novel is something very, very specific.
Hopefully also like this will create the desire to go there. Yeah, this podcast episode. Yeah. But definitely, let me talk a little bit about El Museo and give you some context, and the role it plays within the novel, right? So another aspect of Puerto Rican empowerment in the novel is the idea of cultural pride and identity. So Willie Bodega is proud, of course, of his Puerto Rican heritage. That's something that is consistent with him. So in the novel, it is suggested that he is an arts patron and he uses his cultural knowledge to build a sense of belonging in his Harlem. And one of the institutions he supports and apparently constantly visits is El Museo del Barrio. And within the novel, this space is vital because for Bodega, at least, it serves as an example of the possibilities of cultural retention through institutionalization. El Museo del Barrio is a museum in New York City dedicated to showcasing and preserving Latino, Caribbean, and Latin American arts and cultures. It was founded in 1969, just like the same year that the New York Lords emerged, right, by a group of Puerto Rican educators, artists, and activists that, just like the Young Lords, were concerned about the lack of representation in mainstream institutions.
So we've got two different angles here. We've got this institutionalization with the museum, and then we have this sort of this activist group that's coming up, and so it's a multi-pronged attack to make changes.
So the museum founders were indeed concerned that the rich artistic traditions of their community needed to be recognized and celebrated, and that the cultural contributions of Puerto Ricans and eventually Latinx and Latin Americans were being overlooked by the white mainstream. This decision of amplifying its scope has brought debates and controversies over time, since some people believe that the museums have diffused the original mission of empowering Puerto Rican artists. Others think that it makes sense that with the shifting of demographics in New York City and in Harlem in specific, the museum should, as they have done, expand its focus to other ethnic groups. Quiñonez doesn't get into these cultural fights, and in his representation focuses on the museum origins.
That makes more sense to the context of the novel anyway, so.
The museum started as a small community space in East Harlem and was initially called the Museum of the Puerto Rican Community. And just like the novel Bodega Dreams represent, it exhibit the work of local artists and artifacts related to Puerto Rican history and culture. In the novel, for example, Chino and Bodega see like art connected to the Three Kings Day.
Right.
That's one tiny example of the type of artworks that were displayed. In one of the scenes of the novel, Chino meets Bodega in El Museo del Barrio, and they discuss quote-unquote business while looking at the artwork display. Something happens, within that section that is important, is that Chino comments accurately that this was the only art space where he felt at ease and welcome. Chino says, El Museo del Barrio was the only museum where I could look at the paintings without having a guard follow me from wing to wing. So he's commenting on the criminalization of Puerto Ricans within institutions in New York City. To this day, El Museo del Barrio is one of the most important cultural institutions in New York City, representing a wide range of Puerto Rican, still Latin American, and Caribbean arts. And as the novel showcases, it continues to play a vital role in preserving and promoting the cultural heritage of the Boricua and Latinx communities in the area.
I've only been a couple of times, but I think there's a lot to be said for the cultural specificity of it. While maybe some other museums have opened up to displaying some cultural art as well from the Latin American communities, I think this gives it this feel of like a hominess, in a sense of like this is representative of who Puerto Ricans are, who Latin Americans are, who Latinos are, and it's something that can't be recreated just by a special exhibit in another museum.
Yes, for example, right now there's an excellent exhibit in the Whitney Museum about like Puerto Rican arts after Maria, and it's fantastic to have that, but that is like the first exhibition with Puerto Rican artists in 50 years. Right, so that is the issue that the Museo del Barrio is precisely addressing. We need our own space, and that is what Bodega is also saying. We need our own spaces, we need our own buildings, we need our own institutions.
It goes beyond, and I think we talked about this before when we did Pose. It's not just about having a seat at the table; it's about creating your own table, right, and making your own space.
Yeah, and that is something that really, like, Bodega believes completely in, right? So the third Boricua formation that I want to talk about today is the Nuyorican Poets movement. Yeah, we have talked about the Nuyorican Poets Cafe in the past. We have talked about its one of its founder, Miguel Algarin. But today I'm gonna talk about how the novel incorporates these poets and these poetics. A third way Puerto Rican empowerment is explored in the novel is by featuring reference to several Nuyorican poets who offers insight into the artistic life of Puerto Rican Harlem. Their presence works in the novel as an intertext that allows readers to connect Quiñonez's narrative with larger poetics.
Mm-hmm.
In his essay, Nuyorican Literature, Miguel Algarin, the foundational theoretician of the Nuyorican movement, highlights three tenets of its aesthetics. The first is bilingual orality, that to communicate the Puerto Rican condition in a psychic, economic, and historical sense. He proposes a language and even a constitution for survival on top of tar and concrete. This is essential for Quiñonez as well. The dialogues in the novel look to reproduce the talks on the streets, its originality. Yeah, and many of them are in Spanglish.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
The second tenet of Nuyorican poetics is to procure a future and set up protection and mutual aid system. Yeah, here we can think again about the young lords, yeah, and the legacy of the young lords. As I have been describing, this is at the center of the novel too. Yeah. His last point is about creating spaces where people can come and share their writing and sounds. Yeah, let's remember that Nuyorican artists in spaces like the Nuyorican Village or the Nuyorican Poets Cafe have contributed to the development of Latin music genres like salsa, boogaloo, and Latin jazz. Yeah, and maybe hip hop and reggaeton as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, Algarin and his poet colleagues, like the Young Lords and the artists that founded El Museo del Barrio, believed in the motto "Overlooked No More," and created spaces and institutions to display interdisciplinary poetics.
It's almost in a way that the Nuyorican poets movement is sort of the middle ground between the other two, right? You have the institutionalization of the museum, you have the activism of the Young Lords, and the Nuyorican poets movement. It almost, to me anyway, the way I'm hearing it, seems like it's creating a bridge between those two things.
Yeah, and here, for example, and this is I'm going to be talking about right now precisely about that, we have poets who belong and who were part of the Young Lords, such as Pedro Pietri, right? And so in many ways, the Nuyorican poetics emerged, from that weight of activism.
Makes
as
sense.
well, right? And Pietri himself, right, it's a figure that also has been displayed at El Museo del Barrio as an artist and in its own right, right? In the novel, going back to Bodega Dreams, we have one of the last scenes, we have anachronistically, considering that it was the 90s and some of them already passed away, we have the Nuyorican poets appearing, as a collective, right? Along with the people of Harlem, they pay homage to William Carlos Irizarry. Quiñonez also introduces some of their works and ideas as epigraphs of subtitles of chapters as well.
Right.
So the novel starts with a quote from multi-hyphenated poet Pedro Pietri's most famous text, Puerto Rican Obituary. Puerto Rican Obituary is a 1968 poem that he used to perform at the Young Lords cultural gatherings in the Occupy People's Church in Harlem. Yeah, the quote from Bodega Dreams says, "All die hating the grocery stores that sold them make-believe steak and bulletproof rice and beans. All die waiting, dreaming, hating." End of quote. Within the book, the poem anticipates the characters' experiences of poverty and inequality. One thing both Chino and Willie Bodega have in common is that they come from disadvantaged backgrounds and have experienced racism and discrimination throughout their life, and this portrayal is essential in Pietri's poems as well. Pietri proposes that poverty and marginalization are a form of slow genocide. He also underscores that poverty comes from white supremacy and its system, and it generates inner division, envy, and resentment in the colonized. After experiencing cycles of deferred dreams and real and symbolic death, the characters in Pietri's poem and in Quiñonez's novel use these experiences as motivation, critical reflection, and as a way to create a future otherwise for themselves, and in the case of Bodega, murky as it was, for his community as well.
Yeah.
The other poem that is mentioned in the novel is Piri Thomas, yeah, and along with Pedro Pietri, Ernesto Quiñonez initiates the second section of his novel mentioning him, yeah. This is a gesture that locates Quiñonez's narration within the legacy of the coming of age in Harlem novel that Thomas inaugurated. As with Pietri, one of the key themes in the works of Piri Thomas is the experience of marginalization and discrimination faced by Puerto Ricans and other Latinos in the United States. For example, in his most celebrated book, Down This Main Street, Thomas portrays the racism and prejudice that he and his family encountered and even upheld on a daily basis. He also highlights the ways in which poverty, violence, and drug addiction are often the result of racialized systemic discrimination and neglect by government and social institutions. Racism is also being criminalized and denied employment, educational, and housing opportunities,
Right.
Thomas has argued. And Quiñonez follows this same line of argumentation in Bodega Dreams.
Yeah, I mean, it's not wrong, we talk about this with our students a lot too, this idea of racism is not just the big things. It's not just the in-your-face things. It's these little moments that you might not even necessarily pick up on. In the case of, housing and education opportunities, it might be a lack of even awareness that these options and opportunities could be out there.
Yeah, it's not a dislike of skin color, right? That is very important. That is something that we highlight in our classroom. Yeah, that it goes beyond skin color and it's a system of power, right? And here we have also that we have to understand blackness vis-a-vis whiteness and how whiteness tries to uphold power, right? This idea of racism, how it expresses itself in systemic ways through lack of employment, through lack of healthcare, educational, housing opportunities is something that the novel pinpoints and cares about, right? In terms of critiquing that system.
Right.
Thomas likewise also exploring his autobiographical narratives, poems, and documentaries the complex issues of identity and belonging that arise from being part of a marginalized community. In Bodega Dreams, this is presented through Chino's recollection of his public school days and the ways his white teacher mistreated them, frowning upon Puerto Rican culture and literature, even when the school name was Julia de Burgos, an iconic Puerto Rican poet.
Yeah, that scene in the book is so enraging.
It's very enraging, and if we consider what is happening, in Florida, in Arizona, in Texas, and how ethnic studies has been dismantled and attacked, we see that it's very contemporary to this day. It's not something of the past; it's something that is still with us, an ongoing systemic issue, against marginalized ethnic communities in the U.S. In Thomas's book, he presents similar instances within the educational system of his times, and he also elaborates on how he struggled to reconcile his Puerto Rican and Cuban heritage with his blackness. Thomas also unveils his conflicts around masculinity with his own family and street peers. This masculinist point of view grounds Quiñonez's novel too. Through his experiences, Thomas exposes the ways in which racism and discrimination can lead to feelings of soledad and alienation. Through his personal narrative, Piri Thomas offers a testimony that exposes the systemic injustice that continue to plague the U.S. A former inmate, Thomas is also one of the pioneers describing the pipeline from marginalization to the prison industrial complex. Although Quiñonez's novel only indirectly explores this connection, he also brings the verses of another Nuyorican poet and playwright who described life in prison, Miguel Piñero.
Yeah. Yeah, that was going to be my guess, because there's no one who, when you talk about Nuyorican playwright in particular, he immediately comes to mind.
He synthesizes in his work that experience really well. Yeah. So Ernesto Quiñonez starts the last section of his book with an epigraph from Miguel Piñero's poem, La Bodega Sold Dreams. Yeah. And then we can definitely guess that he transformed or reused that title for his novel, right? And this is the poem that he's referring to, at least one section of it. I dreamt I was this poeta words glittering bright and bold, striking a new rush for gold in Las Bodegas, where our poets' words and songs are sung, but sunlight stealing through Venetian blinds, eyes hating, working of time, clock sweating and swearing and slaving for the final dime, running a maze, a token ride.
All right.
So La Bodega's Old Dreams is a poem by Piñero that explores themes of poverty and the struggle for survival in the urban environment, right? In a specific, in Puerto Rican neighborhoods.
Right.
In his case, it was Loisaida for the most part. In the poem, the narrator observes his own struggles and dreams and those of the people who frequent an allegorical bodega that stands for New York City or the diaspora writ at large. The poem describes the bodega as a place where the storekeeper or the dream merchant sells not only food and drink but also the songs of poets that allowed hope and escape from the harsh realities of life, specifically those of Puerto Rican workers in factorías. As Willie Bodega and Chino observe in the novel, despite the difficulties faced by the people who live in Harlem, Piñero's text also notes a sense of resilience and potentiality even as the neighborhood around the bodega deteriorates. Ultimately, La Bodega's Old Dreams is a commentary on the struggles of the lower classes and the human desire for a dignified life expressed through the voices of the downtrodden. Piñero captures the humanity of the people who frequent the bodega in New York City and the complex emotions that underline their search for meaning and fulfillment. And overall, the Nuyorican poets and Nuyorican formations that I have described from Bodega Dreams played an important role in highlighting the artistic and cultural richness of the community and in expressing the dreams and struggle of its residents.
All right, so if you were talking about the dreams, I think I'm going to be focusing more on how those dreams don't come true, I guess.
How they collapse.
How they break down, right? I'm going to be talking specifically about the ways in which neoliberalism and capitalism are represented in the novel. So let's just start off with the definition of neoliberalism so that we're all on the same page. And then we'll break that down a little bit as it connects with Willie Bodega in particular. So neoliberalism is a political approach that favors free market capitalism, deregulation, and reduction in government spending. So those are three really important factors. Neoliberalism, in the words of Arlene Davila, is, quote, the rubric of economic and urban development policies that favor state deregulations. That is, a decrease in state involvement accompanied by privatization and free market approaches, all in the guise of fostering more efficient technologies of government. I think the key word there is guise. This is one of the things I'm always trying with the students is to be like, okay, like, let's break this down. If we see these words individually, it's like, oh, that sounds great. But when we think about what the actual impact of those elements are, it's a whole different story. And
the impact is what I was talking about, the whole cycles of poverty, of death, right? That Pietri describes, and Piri Thomas also like highlights, and also the criminalization of the people living in these communities.
So in Davila's book, Barrio Dreams, she shows how neoliberalism has transformed El Barrio through gentrification, consumption, and marketing in ethnic areas. She informs readers that 93.6% of the population of East Harlem is made up of renters, the majority of whom are Black and Latinx. 93.6%. Like, that's absurd.
That's...
Yeah,
extremely high.
Extremely high. And her study shows how New York's neoliberal policies have served to displace the majority of the working class community in this neighborhood as well. And she really has a great breakdown of the numbers, the population, and that sort of history and trajectory of the neighborhood.
The key word here being displacement, of course.
Yes. So East Harlem, Spanish Harlem, El Barrio, whichever name you used, right? This neighborhood has the second largest concentration of public housing units in New York City as well. And over 50% of its population is dependent on publicly subsidized housing. But what does this mean? Like, what is the impact of neoliberalism here? So the neighborhood is particularly vulnerable to changes in city, state, and federal policy changes about public housing. So if you're reliant on public housing, you're reliant on subsidies and that sort of thing, if there's a policy change regarding that, that's going to affect your way of living.
And the roof in your head in a literal way.
Exactly. Yeah. For example, the move at the federal level away from direct subsidies for the construction of affordable housing and instead towards vouchers has negatively impacted residents of El Barrio in terms of their housing. So that's just one example. But again, you understand the system works one particular way, the policy changes, now the system works a whole different way. And it works in a way that is meant to keep you out or keep you down.
That is something that Quiñonez talks about in Taina. That's one of the main concerns of all his novels, right? And in Taina in specific, it's about public housing.
Okay.
Yeah, and the projects.
So this move towards more privatization of properties has also had a negative impact. While 93.6% of the people are renters, the buildings that they live in are privately owned instead of owned and regulated by the city. This allows for deregulation of housing management and maintenance. And, of course, higher rent equals less affordable housing. So that's where we're talking about that displacement of the population.
And Harlem here also stands for the rest of the city because the situation is no different in other neighborhoods.
Yeah, that's very true, right? A lot of times we'll read a novel that takes place in one specific area or city or state or whatever, and we recognize it as symbolic for the country at large. Here, this neighborhood within New York is representative.
It's a case study, right, of how the city moves, right? And how is displacing, all its immigrant communities.
Exactly. So in Bodega Dreams, Willie Bodega dreams of transforming El Barrio into a neighborhood consisting of Latino professionals. He believes that through cunning and politics, this professional class of Latinos could lead the neighborhood to economic and political empowerment. Although he's still at the top with, being the slumlord, as he calls himself at one point.
Yeah. So that there's, as I was mentioning, he shift, from more like socialist ideas to more like to capitalism, in which there's an inherent hierarchy, and some people are on top and some people are at the bottom.
Exactly, and also as you mentioned, Bodega was part of the Young Lords, right? However, he distanced himself from the Young Lords' socialist ideology by turning to mainstream market-oriented type of empowerment. He came to believe that it was only by following the rules of the white men in power that Latinos can get ahead in El Barrio. In other words, to get ahead, they have to sign the right papers. They have to accumulate property, money, and power. And Bodega knows that the government is no longer supporting the neighborhood and that as a result of neoliberal practices, white yuppies have started moving in and buying up the property in the neighborhood. So he has a plan to stop this. He has to sign the right papers. He has to accumulate property, money, and power. But as Audre Lorde once said, the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. Right? Bodega dreams of what Yomaira Figueroa refers to as reparations for his community. Now, oftentimes when we think about reparations, we think about slavery, but the definition of the word extends to one that can work in relation to colonialism and how it affects communities such as Puerto Ricans as well. So reparations are the making of amends for a wrong one has done by paying money to or otherwise helping those who have been wronged. So Bodega recognizes that the people in his community have been wronged, and he wants to fix that. He has dreams of providing for and nurturing the community to develop a Puerto Rican middle class in El Barrio. He then wants those newly empowered to wield political power within the city, right? This is how he's thinking of expanding his empire in a sense. If anyone has watched the Luke Cage series on Netflix, it reminds me a lot of the power structure within Harlem. The other Harlem, I guess. It's not East Harlem. It's like
West Harlem.
West Harlem.
Yeah.
But it's a similar structure where you have someone kind of using selling drugs and corruption and owning buildings and property as a way to uplift the community. But of course, the way that they're doing it is through these corrupt means. So it's just a parallel example if anybody is familiar. So how does Bodega plan to wield this political power and develop this community, right? With drug money. Now, some of this drug money is laundered through his lawyer friend Nazario and then used to buy real estate in Spanish Harlem, which in turn is rented out to Puerto Ricans and other Latina community members. So he's giving back, right? It sounds great. It's not that easy, right? Some of the money, though, is also used to fund needs that come up within the community. So people who have medical expenses, need college funding, business support, etc. Willie Bodega is going to help you out with that. And I mean, that is just another, again, as you said, this is sort of a microcosm of a larger problem, is that when we think about things today like GoFundMes, and how we need a structure like that in place because our government has failed us. But now that we have that structure in place, the government has no reason to help us out. It's kind of this catch-22. Like, we don't have good medical assistance. We don't have good college, support, etc. And it's like doubly impacted in this particular community. One example from the novel of Bodega using his money to fund these needs is when he offers to pay for Chino's schooling at Hunter College. Multiple times he offers this. It's like, I can help you out with this. I'll pay for your classes, etc.
He wants another lawyer. Yeah, that's what he wants, right?
Well, and
he also, there's another more like intimate need happening, connected to like Bodega's love life,
right,
and how it is connected to Chino's family.
Yes,
but the main interest is also like as we were saying, like expanding this elite society that will allow the Puerto Rican community to hold more power eventually, right? And end the cycles of debt, that we have been talking about, and poverty and scarcity and displacement.
I will say the irony of him continuing to offer to pay for his college is that he keeps like needing him when he's supposed to be going to class and like pulling him out of class instead. So he's not even, it's...
That's the big irony, of that situation, right?
Oh, and remember that Audre Lorde quote that I shared just a moment ago? The master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. Yeah, well, it goes on. That's not the end of the quote. She follows that up with, they may allow us temporarily to beat him at his own game, but they will never enable us to bring about genuine change. And I think that's an important follow-up, right?
It summarizes, the novel in many ways.
Yeah. So it is Bodega's inability to think outside of the capitalist approach to power that leads to his failure. He thinks he can beat gentrification and neoliberalism with capitalist tools. Like, you can't beat capitalism with capitalism. You're just going to stay stuck. As Figueroa explains in her book Decolonizing Diasporas, instead of imagining a subversion of neoliberal politics, Bodega plays into them by providing the resources for a community of Latinx middle-class elites to emerge through the legality that Nazario provides. Bodega criticizes the neoliberal power structures that are in place in New York City, but at the same time, he attempts to replicate them in El Barrio. No radical change can take place if he's just using the same tools and methods that the oppressor uses. Now, Bodega is not the only one to fall victim to this process in the novel. Nazario has his own methods, and his role as a lawyer appears to make him think he's invincible to the oppressor as well. But once he's exposed at the end of the novel, the buildings that Bodega had bought and that Nazario presumed to take control of are actually reclaimed by the city. While the residents are now vulnerable, they do still remain hopeful because of the title of the novel, Bodega's Dreams. And what about Chino, our narrator, right? Throughout the novel, Chino wanted out. He wanted out of El Barrio. He wanted out of Bodega's control. Even as a young boy, Chino would dream about leaving El Barrio. And when he brought this up to his best friend Sapo, Sapo didn't see any reason to want to leave, right? There's that whole bit with the kites and stuff in the early portion of the novel. Chino believed his education could get him out of El Barrio. During high school, he attended a special school for the arts outside of the neighborhood, and stepping out of El Barrio provided the opportunity to consider other options for his future and was likely a deciding factor in him finishing school and going on to college. After high school, Chino attended courses at Hunter, as did his wife Blanca. His hope was to finish school and get a good job so he wouldn't have to stay there. But Chino was affected by Bodega's dreams. It took a while. He wasn't easily swayed, but he was eventually brought over.
It's a slow transformation, right?
Absolutely.
But also he get affected by those dreams. He gets influenced by those dreams, but then at the end he depart from those dreams.
Exactly.
And think of that empowerment from a different point of view.
Well, and that's exactly it, right? At the end of the novel, we see Chino invite the old man and his grandson to come stay with him in his own apartment. They're looking for Bodega, but Bodega is dead. And Chino wants to walk away, but the influence of Bodega's dreams allows him a moment to pause and decide to open up his home to them. But as Figueroa tells us, unlike Bodega, Chino wants nothing in return for his hospitality. This decolonial love, as she calls it, is a possibility that Bodega cannot even imagine. So Chino's been changed. He dreams of the reparations that Bodega sought, but not in the way that Bodega sought them. As Figueroa explains regarding Chino's invitation of the old man and his grandson into his home, he transforms a reparation built on drug economies and accumulation into a reparation that is contingent on complex coalition building. So maybe this is where the hope comes in?
We would like to, now thinking about that ending and thinking about, right, Chino's transformation and thinking, of how, like, mutual aid is essential, coalition is essential. We want to explore a little more the notion of decolonial love that Yomaira Figueroa Vasquez presents in Decolonizing Diasporas. She says that decolonial love is what fuels the work of decolonization as a political and social project, right? Decolonial love necessitates ethical actions in the face of visible and invisible domination. That part of ethical is essential. And here what we have is Bodega failed because his ethics were nowhere to be found. There was no ethics there. It was all about power, right? So decolonial love requires forging relationship based on love and affinity, right? So that idea of love for the neighborhood, affinity in terms of the culture is important there, but also bearing witness to the violence of the past, to colonialism in Puerto Rico, to colonialism and coloniality in the U.S. as well. So that is central to achieving what Yomaira Figueroa calls, again, decolonial reparation.
Practices of decolonial love can be found across communities of color in creative, political, social, and cultural, and maybe religious and spiritual forms, and act as reparative forces beyond the scope of capitalist accumulation. Bodega Dreams posits a reparation of the self and reconciliation of the community. Quiñonez proposes a reparation of the imagination by decolonial love that goes beyond colonial and settler logics.
Figueroa says that Bodega's grand vision of real estate power and middle-class aspirations helped Julio or Chino start practicing decolonial love by finding beauty in his neighborhood, love for his community, and the case, or the example of the grandson and his grandfather is key here, and respect for the literal and cultural language of the community, so that Spanglish that the Nuyorican poets put in the fore.
However, she argues that Bodega's dreams fail because of his reliance on the capitalist model of accumulation and distribution. Bodega believes that reparations for East Harlem will be achieved by mimicking corrupt Anglo-political and economic patterns. And as I think we've kind of summed up for you over the course of this episode, that is not something that is going to be successful. It's not something that was successful. And this decolonializing approach is going to have more of a long-term impact on the community in a positive way than Bodega's approach.
Here, of course, is like this idea, what Figueroa Vázquez is presented is this idea that in order to achieve that decolonial love, that is not an easy task. Yeah, the coalition building needs to happen. That's why also like looking at the roots of the young lords, looking at the roots of this like movement that empower the Puerto Rican community in the 60s is key, and see what things have worked in the past and also how things we can like instrumentalize in the present and in the future. So the colonial love is a very complex and layered process, but it requires that examining that work of looking at successful models from the past.
All right, so let's wrap up with a couple of recommendations, other Latinx novels that center around or take place in New York City.
Yeah, so if you want to explore another Nuyorican novel about Harlem, but from a feminist point of view, you can read Nilda by Nicolás Amor. Originally published in 1973, this award-winning novel talks about the early generation of Puerto Ricans living in Harlem during the 1940s, a period of war and intense social repression. And like the writers discussed today, Moore talks about the violence of authority figures against Puerto Rican youth, such as the police, teachers, nurses, and social workers. She also looks at the power of the arts as a method of healing, bonding, and cultural expression. Nicolás Moore's novel about life as a Puerto Rican in New York City offers an on-target look at one young girl's experiences and how she deals with interconnected race, religion, and machismo issues.
I'm going to recommend Dominicana by Angie Cruz. Dominicana is a 2019 novel about 15-year-old Ana Cancion, who is basically forced to marry a much older man named Juan Ruiz, who promises to take her to New York City. Her family sees this as an opportunity for them all to eventually move to the United States from the Dominican Republic, and so she does what is expected of her. The year is 1965, and Ana leaves behind everything she knows to become Ana Ruiz. Life in the U.S. is not what she expected, however. Juan's jealousy and misogyny leave Ana trapped alone in their apartment. Ana spends her time planning her escape until Juan's brother Cesar convinces her to stay. Due to the political turmoil taking place in the DR, Juan returns to the island, leaving Cesar to take care of Ana. With Juan gone, Ana is free to leave her apartment, take English lessons, go to Coney Island, go out dancing, and imagine how different life in the U.S. could actually be. By the time Juan returns, Ana has changed quite a bit and now must decide between her heart's desires and her duty to her family. We want to thank you for joining us for this episode. Before we sign off, we want to invite you to share your thoughts with us on this or any episode. You can always reach out to us on social media or by email. Follow the podcast on Twitter and Instagram at Latinx Visions, and our email address is latinxvisions@gmail.com. We'd love to include your thoughts in a future episode.
Subscribe to us on Spotify, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or wherever else you get your podcasts. Share us with your friends and family, and subscribe and leave a review on both Apple and Spotify. Así que nos vemos, estamos a la escucha.
Dale. Until next time.